There's no debating it. Making the playoffs is the absolute expectation for the Sacramento Kings this upcoming season. Anything less is unacceptable. Those aren't just my words. Those are the words of Kings general manager Monty McNair. But is making the playoffs enough, or did the Kings actually have to win a playoff series? It's a very similar conversation to what we had at this time last year. But this time, the Kings have added a six-time All-Star in DeMar DeRozan. Whitey Gleason from Sac Town Sports 1140 joins me to discuss that and more right here on Locked On Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all offseason long. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports anchor and reporter for ABC 10 News. And like many of you, I grew up in Sacramento listening to Sacramento Sports Talk Radio at formerly Sports 1140 KHTK, now known as Sac Town Sports 1140. And one of the great hosts that has been there for a while, on and off, is the legendary Whitey Gleason. And it's been a while since I've never actually had him on the podcast, and I've been wanting to have him on for quite a while. Well, finally, the day is here. Whitey Gleason joins me here on the Locked On Kings podcast. I hope you enjoy. For the first time, and hopefully many, many times, Whitey Gleason is on the Locked On Kings podcast. I'm going to say it. Sacramento sports radio legend, Whitey Gleason. Of course, you can catch him on Sac Town Sports 1140, hosting with Kyle Draper every single day. And now you can catch him here on Locked On Kings. Whitey, thanks for coming on, my friend. I listened to you growing up all the time. You've been following and covering the Sacramento Kings in some capacity for over 30 years. And now to have your expertise here on Locked On Kings, it's a real treat. So welcome in, my friend.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, one, thank you. Two, you're still growing up. I don't think you're there yet, frankly.
Fair.
And then thirdly, I feel badly because clearly you have completely run out of guests if you're asking me. So it's like, that's it. Bottom of the barrel. Happy to help out.
I have a tier list of like star guests that I'd love to have on the show. It's DeAaron Fox, Domantas Sabonis, and Whitey Gleason. And I can check off one of those three on the show finally. Whitey, it's so much fun to have you on. Like I mentioned in the introduction, you've been covering the Sacramento Kings and following the Kings media-wise in some capacity for 30 years. So you've rode with us the highs and the lows of the last 30 years in this organization. Of course, the highs of the late 90s, early 2000s, the low before that, although it didn't kind of feel like a low because the Kings coming to Sacramento, everybody was excited, even if the team was bad. And then the 16 years that we finally got over of playoff-less basketball. Now we're on this climb of back-to-back winning seasons, even though the Kings didn't make the playoffs last year, which was for sure disappointing. Then you have this offseason where you get a top free agent in Malik Monk to choose to come back and choose to do so early and leave money on the table elsewhere, followed by DeMar DeRozan choosing to sign here, a six-time All-Star. You know that doesn't really happen in Sacramento's history. Do you think it's fair to say, even with the addition of Mike Brown a couple of years ago, do you think it's fair to say that this organization has escaped kind of that dark past, the dark cloud of that playoff drought and the struggles during that time? Or do they still have to maybe win a playoff series or go a little bit further before they're completely out of that era?
That's a great question. I also want to point out, I understand the glory days were C-Web and all of that, but let's not forget, of course, the first year they were here, they made the playoffs somehow. But also that 96 team with Mitch, and that was a fun team, and it was a short period where they were competitive, but they almost beat Seattle in the first round. And that team was kind of a blue-collar team that I think really reflected some of the values of the city. But to answer your question, and I'm not underdressed today. I got my 2002 Western Conference Finals vintage shirt on here. I thought that was appropriate. To answer your question, I think it's still an open question. Last year, 2 years ago, it looked like, wow, they had escaped that gravity. They'd gotten into the next level. And it was interesting to me because it seemed to me the light the beam year where they ended up playing the Warriors, they kind of put that dark Luka cloud behind them, because it was like,
Mm,
you know what, that wasn't a great move, but it didn't matter
mm.
because it looked like they'd gotten beyond that and they were building towards something. Last year, because last year was kind of a step back, and last year was so disappointing for so many fans. I think that's what this year is about. It looked like, yes, they had put all that behind them, but I think right now, yeah, there's a lot of optimism, but I think it's still a fair question. Is this the team? Is this the core that's going to put all of that in the rearview mirror for good, or are they still caught up in that Kingsness of it all? I don't know the answer, but I think there are lots of reasons to be optimistic this year.
The cliche is winning cures everything, but does it really for this organization, in the sense that they start winning basketball games, they make the playoffs, and finally we can put that aspect of the Kings losing and the playoff drought and everything to bed. But there's still these little things, there's these little moments, Whitey, that remind me of the Kings of the past. And the big one this summer was, now in the end, it didn't end up meaning anything or really mattering, but how the Kings handled the Mike Brown contract extension. I thought, just with it going into the media now, I'm pretty certain I know what camp that came from. That came from Mike
Mm-hmm.
Brown's side and using
Mm-hmm.
leverage, and I understand that play completely. But you have this man who comes in a couple years ago, is preaching organizational change, not just coaching change, and then he wins Coach of the Year unanimously for the first time. Completely changes this organization around. Has done really nothing but win in the time that he's been here in Sacramento, even with last year's context. And it was, maybe we don't want to pay him that much money. Maybe this. I just thought this is a remembrance of like the inconsistencies and the revolving door of coaches and just all the struggles that Sacramento had over that 16-year playoff drought. I'm glad they got the deal done. Hopefully, ultimately, nobody cares how the deal got done, but there are still these little moments that happen over the course of a season or off season or things like that, where you're just like, man, is this organization truly out of that Kangs era?
Well, I would suggest that I think Mike Brown's camp, like everyone else, is keenly aware of the Kings' history. So,
Mm.
they're his agent's just doing his job, and if he can use any of that as leverage to work against the Kings, like, my guy and the Kings, they haven't come to terms yet, and the Kings, and so I think that was a matter of Mike Brown's camp kind of using that history against the Kings. So yeah, it's going to take a while before they put all that behind them for good. And let's be honest, I mean, some of it's going to linger until the day, and I'm not saying it's any time near, when they actually win it all, because as you know, they came so
Mm.
close, way back when. They should have been at least in the finals. So that those missteps are going to define the organization for a long time. Baby steps, as you say, winning can solve everything. It just takes a while. You have to win more than just one magical year to reverse all that.
Yeah, and I think the playoff history of the Sacramento Kings actually properly illustrates this. Like, people forget, after the Mitch Richmond led team made the playoffs, the Kings in the C Webb era, the first 2 years they made the playoffs, they lost in the first round. Once to the Jazz, once to the Lakers. It wasn't until the third straight year they made the playoffs that they actually made it to the second round, and then they were swept by the
Mm-hmm.
Lakers in the
Mm-hmm.
second round. But they finally beat the Suns to actually win a playoff series. From that point, then we got into 2002. We know what happened in 2002, and from that point on, the Kings were winning multiple playoff series, typically every single year, and making those deeper playoff runs. So it's you climb rungs of a ladder, right? Ultimately, the way I look at last season, yes, the Kings missed the playoffs, but I am kind of choosing to look at it, Whitey, and maybe it's unfair. I'm looking at that as the second year that they made the playoffs and were a first round exit. To me, looking at this season, I'm expecting, especially with the roster additions that they made, with the timelines that they're on contractually, they only have DeMar DeRozan under contract for 3 years, and really to expect more beyond that, with DeMar being 35 to start this season, I think is unrealistic. So you're looking for this team to strike now. Monty McNair's own words, we're trying to win right now. He said anything but making the playoffs is a failure. Now, to me, the question becomes, okay, you make the playoffs again. That is the expectation 100%. Is being a first round exit acceptable again because of missing the playoffs last year? Or is this the year that the Kings have to make the playoffs and then win a playoff series before us to really start to define success?
It's impossible to answer because, as you know, it will depend on how exactly it happens.
Right.
But I tend to agree with that notion that at some point you got to punch through to the second round. I know a year ago, a lot of us were talking, I'm sure you were talking about, what's going to constitute a successful season. And a lot of people a year ago said, oh, you got to get out of the first round. I was of the opinion that you get back to the playoffs last year, that's an accomplishment. 2 years in a row in the playoffs for the Kings would be a major accomplishment. And I know they came, about as close as you can come, but they didn't do it. So I'm with you. Getting back to the postseason, that would be an achievement this year. But yeah, the way they're loading up, at some point you got to punch. You got to punch through and get to the next round. And then, as we know, forgive me for saying this because everyone knows it. Everyone says it. The West is so freaking tough, and there are indications that it could even get tougher before the next season tips off.
See, I think there's a level of excitement to that. 100% the West is tougher. The West is brutal. But I think there's an element of that is good for this Kings team in the sense that there's been concerns in the NBA recently about, hey, does the regular season matter? The regular season doesn't matter. And for some of these top teams that are bound to make it to the playoffs every single year, maybe for them they can feel that way. The Kings can't feel that way. And how they stack up every single night against Western Conference opponents is ultimately iron sharpens iron. I think it's what's going to make them better. So I'm going to be very, no pun intended, I'm going to be very locked into how this season goes and how the Kings stack up against these Western Conference opponents, because as we've seen in years past, and especially last year, we know the Kings can compete with the best. It's, can they stay afloat in the Western Conference when they're playing those Eastern Conference teams on a Wednesday night, like the Detroit Pistons, or when they're taking on the Portland Trail Blazers the day after Christmas? How do they look in those games? Because in order to be good in the West, you have to be consistent, and consistency is still what I feel has been lacking with this team, even over the last 2 seasons when they've been so good.
Yeah, taking a broader view of it, not just so King-centric, I'm with you, and I think it's an indication that the plan has worked for the NBA. One of the reasons they went with that, and the in-season tournament, I don't know, but the plan, one of the ideas was we've got to do something to make the regular season more meaningful. And I think we've seen that. And maybe it's just a matter of, as you say, the West is so hyper competitive, but it's true and it's fun. Every game does matter. It does remind me, going back to that 99 year when it was strike shortened, or lockout shortened, I should say. And they had 50 games, and you had a game, like once they started, it's like every night and every game mattered, and they ended up getting in and losing in the first round to Utah. But yeah, you're right. I mean, last year, how many times did we see them lose games that, to bad teams? But all of those games mattered from a fan standpoint. I got to tip my cap to the NBA. Maybe some of it was an accident, but they got that right. And it's one of the things that makes this such an exciting time to be a Kings fan.
Like I said at the top of the show, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, but of course, that's not all. You can find your NBA tickets, NFL tickets, college sports tickets, heck, concerts, theatrical productions, comedy shows, whatever the case may be. You need tickets. Game Time is your go-to ticket marketplace. Why? Because they have last-minute deals that cannot be beaten. Game Time actually rewards you the later you wait to buy your tickets. You can get up to 60% off buying last minute for any of the events you're interested in. They have incredible flash deals where you can save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of a game or event. They have zone deals. Say, for example, you want to go see the Sacramento Kings play, and there's a specific area in the arena that you like to sit. Maybe you want to be in one of the corners behind the Kings bench. So you pick that zone, right? And Game Time will find the best seats for you there at a killer deal for you. Plus, their seat views cannot be beaten. This is especially good for when you go to a major stadium event, like maybe you're going to see a Niners game at Levi Stadium or a big concert at Levi Stadium. You'll know exactly what your view is going to look like, all obstructions in your way, where the stage will be or where all the action will be. You'll see it better than any other marketplace out there. It almost looks like you're actually there sitting in your seat. It's that accurate. So all of these features on Game Time truly can't be beaten. If you want to buy your tickets on Game Time for the first time, hey, I got a deal for you. Download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA. You'll get $20 off of your first ticket purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. We don't know if this is going to be the starting 5, but we know the Kings have a core 5, right? The Fox, Sabonis, DeRozan, Malik Monk, and Keegan Murray. Thinking about those 5, all in completely different spots in their career. DeMar DeRozan is up there. He's the veteran presence that is hopefully just coming in to give this Kings team that offensive spark that they need. You have Domantas Sabonis, who's starting his first of 4 years of making over $40 million a year. DeAaron Fox has a big contract extension looming on the horizon. Keegan Murray's probably getting paid at some point, and Malik just re-signed. So all these 5 guys are in different situations, but ultimately trying to accomplish the same goal of winning here in Sacramento. Do you think and for any 5 of them, or maybe all 5 of them, there's make or break opportunity this season to where, let's say the Sacramento Kings make the postseason again, but Fox struggles, or Domantas Sabonis struggles again, the same way that he struggled against the Golden State Warriors, or this is the 3rd year in a row where the Kings were hoping for more offensively from Keegan outside of 3-point shooting, and he didn't give it to him. Are you looking at any of those core 5 as, man, there's things that could potentially happen this season that make me decide, okay, he's in it for the long haul, or maybe the Kings have to consider upgrading that spot?
A lot of them, at least 3 that you mentioned, have something to prove still, as successful as the Kings have been. As you said, not to be redundant, Domas has stood in the postseason. I think DeAaron Fox, as great as he's been the last 2 years, I think there are still questions about, okay, but can he be that guy? Get on my back, and I'm going to lead you to a postseason win. There's lots of reasons to believe he can, but he hadn't done it yet. And Keegan, we know everyone loves Keegan, but there are questions still about how good he's going to be. I think DeRozan too. When you look at, his teams haven't won a lot, and he's a phenomenal player, and he's a Hall of Famer. So I think there are a lot of questions that they have to answer this year as individuals, in addition to answering questions as a team. I think that actually gets also to something that I'm a little concerned about. And we know that Monty's looking at everything, and going back to before they signed DeRozan, I know, talking to the great Jerry Reynolds, and I know you've done podcasts with Jerry Reynolds, he said, I think they need 2 players. They need to add 2 significant players. And the DeRozan signing is great, and bringing about Malik was fabulous, and Mike Brown's great. I still feel like you could use a little more depth in the front court, maybe a 4-5. And it's easy to say that. Well, who? And we talk about Jeremy Grant, Cam Johnson. I still feel like I look at this roster, and I still feel like, to me, DeMar DeRozan is better as more of a 2, and you could use a little more size in the front court. So I'm sure if that's true, I think it is true. They recognize that. Maybe they're biding their time. They don't want to overpay. Maybe they want to wait and see what options they have at the deadline. But I think that's a big question that has to be answered about this team going forward.
I love that you brought that up, because that's been a conversation here on Locked On Kings. Strike while the iron's hot versus try and play the patient game. And we know with Monty McNair, he has been very consistent since the time he took his job with patience and flexibility, right?
Yes.
He's always looking to upgrade this roster, but he's not going to make the move for the sake of making a move. And I think the DeMar DeRozan addition is great in 2 senses. One, it fits Monty's mold completely. You wait for a player to become available that you didn't necessarily think was going to become available, and you got him without trading away a whole lot. No disrespect to Harrison Barnes, awesome player. I'm looking forward to what he can do with the San Antonio Spurs. The biggest thing you shipped out, other than Barnes and that, is a pick swap. You didn't lose the pick outright. So you still have, I know that the Atlanta pick is still muddied up a little bit, but you still have a lot of draft assets going forward to make another big move on top of that. If you went for Brandon Ingram or went for Lauri Markkanen, that wouldn't have been the case. You would have pretty much had to go all in for either one of those guys. So I kind of turn it over to you then. Are you more in the camp of like, hey, let's strike while the iron's hot here, try and add that piece right now? Or do you like the idea, knowing Monty's history of going through trade deadlines and not really doing anything? Do you like the idea of the Kings keeping their assets, and maybe we get into February this year and they make the swing at that point?
I like doing something now, because who knows what it's going to look like at the deadline. Who knows how many other teams are going to be in, how many other teams you're going to be competing with. I'll say this about Monty, to your point. There's a term I learned long ago in college, reptilian patience. And that to me is Monty. If you've ever, maybe you see a lizard out on a rock, or you see a turtle sunning itself, these reptiles, they just sit there and they're like, I'm good. And they're just going to sit there and sit there. And that's kind of what Monty, it's one of his strengths. He can do that. But to your point, yeah, I would like to see him take advantage of some of the opportunities that we know are there right now. We mentioned some of the players, and okay, maybe nobody is a perfect fit and the prices are a little high. So I understand intellectually why you would wait, but emotionally, I want to go out and get somebody, and then think how exciting that would be and how excited everybody will be about the start of the season.
If you go onto X and follow Whitey, and you absolutely should, at Whitey Gleason, you'll find at the very top of his Twitter page right now is a tweet that says, "If the Kings get Cam Johnson, I will make a Monty McNair vest, I will make Monty McNair a vest myself. I'll learn to crochet or sew or whatever I have to make it happen, and it will be a glorious vest." First off, I would love to see a Whitey Gleason made vest, and I would probably purchase one. Second off, Cam Johnson. Why Cam Johnson specifically? Because I agree with you, man. The Brooklyn Nets, they've clearly chosen a direction. Poor Jordy Fernandez, but they got rid of Mikal Bridges. They've chosen a direction. Cam Johnson and Dorian Finney-Smith, they're there for the taking, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. A year ago, he was my number one guy. So we looked at what the Kings would do. And to your point, other than bringing in Sasha, re-signing Harrison Barnes, it didn't do much. But a year ago, I thought Cam Johnson is the perfect fit. Now, Brooklyn snapped him up pretty quickly. I don't even think he was on the market long, if he was at all. To answer your question, he's a great three-point shooter. We know that. He can play either forward position. He's probably not as good of a defender as I talked myself into thinking he was a year ago. He doesn't need the ball a lot. He can be a complimentary player. There are times when he's going to score a lot, but if he's not getting a lot of shots, he's still going to produce for you. I think that's part of one of the issues with Kuzma. Would Kuzma be willing to come in and play second, third, or fourth fiddle? With Cam Johnson, it's not a problem. He gives you front court versatility. He does tend to get, overmatched against bigger guys, but he's a good shooter. He can play that role, third or fourth fiddle, if you will, without that affecting the way he plays. It gives you depth in the front court. I just think and he's still young. I think he really upgrade your talent level at a position where you really need it. I think he's a really good fit in that regard.
Let's go back to DeAaron Fox really quick. I was at his basketball camp a couple of months ago now, or around a month ago.
Did you learn anything?
Well, I learned that DeAaron probably knew about Malik Monk and didn't tell us, the Sly Dog, because we asked him during our conversation. We asked him about Malik, and you go back and you watch the footage. He cracks a little smile and he goes, "I don't know what his plan is. We just met with him and talked to him yesterday." I'm like, "Yeah, Malik told you yesterday that he's staying, you son of a gun. Tell us something." But no, he's a good guy protecting his guy. But I got the chance to speak with Luke Lautz. It was really cool because Luke came through, and Luke is the one that works with DeAaron Fox, Kings assistant coach Luke Lautz, who's the guy that pretty much is credited for helping DeAaron with his three-point shot that's really emerged over the last couple seasons. And I spoke with Luke, and I pulled him aside, and Luke just told me, man, like, DeAaron is primed to explode this year, right? And that kind of led to a podcast that I ended up hosting a while ago where I just talked about, I have more confidence in DeAaron Fox now than I ever have before. And I've always had confidence in Fox to start the season. He usually starts the season hot, right? He was averaging over 30 points per game to start last season.
Yeah.
I have confidence in DeAaron Fox down the stretch of a season, or even in the playoffs. He had one of the best playoff debuts in NBA history against the Warriors last season. Where the biggest question mark to me with DeAaron Fox is January, February, maybe even late December, right? That dog days middle part of the season where, like, it sounds unfair to say like taking games off, but that's where we don't see DeAaron have the killer mindset necessarily during those games that we see at the beginning or at the end of the season. That to me is what's missing for DeAaron. What's stopping DeAaron from being a 30 point per game scorer is those stretch of games right there, those nights where the Kings need him to score 25, 26 every single time, and maybe he has a 21 or 22 or a 19-point game here or there. Bad games are going to happen. But I think unlocking the next level for DeAaron Fox is just having him be the guy all season long. What do you think about that?
I think that it's a shame he appeared to get hurt last year. And I know there was never any official announcement. You may know more about it than I do. It looked like, we know he banged up his shoulder at one point. It looked, he got off, to your point, to a great start. We were talking to Michael Pina or somebody on our show about how he was off to an unbelievable start because his 3-point numbers went up so high early in the year. It's like, this guy's unstoppable. And then he tailed off, 3-point shooting leveled off. Some of that maybe was just, regression, but I think he got hurt. I also think, I understand your point. He does seem to get up for some teams more than others. I was concerned about the way the Pelicans seemed to really do a number on him last year. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking of one game in particular here. I think it was Kings had a little winning streak going. You remember the game. And they came in here and they shut him down with ridiculous rebound numbers. It seemed like they understood physically how to play DeAaron Fox. So I'm more concerned. I think DeAaron Fox, I understand your question about motivation. I'm not as concerned about that as I am about A, his health going forward because he carries such a heavy load, and B, the way some teams seem to be, especially New Orleans, seem to be playing him physically and finding a way to throw him off his game.
And I think the 3-point shooting also had something to do with Fox's health in the sense that DeAaron, for the majority of his career, has been a guy that's put his head down, gone to the rim, and gotten whacked. Like he has spent a lot of time on the ground. He's almost Gerald Wallace-esque in that sense. He's just always on the ground for some reason because he's getting hit. He should get to the foul line more than he does. I think part of that is also of his own volition. Like he needs to learn, like Jalen Brunson and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander do. Hey, sell it a little bit, but he deserves to get to the foul line more than he does. But you see the volume of 3-point shooting, how much it's gone up. He went from 5 attempts to just shy of 8 attempts per game, which in some sense is great because now defenses have to absolutely respect Fox as a 3-point shooter, which makes him unguardable. But the season before, when he won Clutch Player of the Year, he was a mid-range merchant. He kind of went away from that last season. Wasn't getting to the rim and finishing at the rim as much last season. I think part of that was because he knows, hey, I'm trying to play beyond 82 games. I'm also banged up. This 3-point shot looks a lot better with slight contesting than me trying to battle through a forward and a center and finish at the rim. So you also have to respect like the emergence of the 3-point shot also kind of protects DeAaron Fox in a way.
Yeah. And I will say this, I'd love your opinion. He, to me, was the most outspoken King once they started officiating the game differently around the All-Star break. And he wasn't whining about it. But, after games, he would talk about it kind of matter-of-factly, like, oh, they say they're not, but they're definitely calling the games differently. And I think that impacted him a lot. I think that frustrated him. But you're right. The thing is that if you're taking a 3 just because you don't want to go into the paint, that's not a good reason to take a 3.
I'm glad you brought up the defense or the officiating rather, because I think it had a clear effect on the defense. In fact, I know it did because DeAaron said it and Mike Brown has said it. Like they talk about the reason why they felt the Kings, one of the reasons why, it wasn't the sole reason, but one of the main factors towards the Kings playing better defense in the final third of the season really was because of how the officiating was different and it allowed the Kings to play more physical on the defensive end and they enjoyed playing that way. I'd love to be able to say that the defense that the Kings ended last season, which was the top half of the league defense, that defense they can carry out through 82 games. But the fact that it's so reliant upon a variable that the Kings can't control, the officiating, that worries me a little bit because if the officials come out to start next season and it's right back to, hey, every single contact on an offensive player is a foul. We're going to have 130-point games every single night because there's going to be a lot of free throws with the clock stopped. If that's what we go back to, I almost expect the Kings to be a poor defensive team again. Or hopefully the officiating says, nope, like we're going to let you play on a little bit more. I understand that might frustrate Fox in the sense that he feels he's being bumped. But I think ultimately that's more of a benefit for the Kings as a whole because defensively we know if they're allowed to play physical, they can play well.
My guess, based on what we saw in the finals, is that the officials are likely to continue to allow that contact. For whatever reason, it seems like the league really embraced that and what it brought to the game. I mean, at times it was ridiculous. Like, blow the whistle. That's a penalty in the NFL and you're not calling anything. It's interesting to me that the Kings, once they started officiating the games differently, Matt, as you know, the Kings numbers, as you said, they started going up defensively. But that wasn't true of everybody. So some of that was, Keon Ellis playing, but also was, and I think you touched on this, the style of defense the Kings play that Mike Brown teaches, it really benefits from a little bit of a looser whistle, so that's why they went up when other teams didn't necessarily, because he's always been talking about, getting up in guys, putting your chest in them. And now that's more allowed. So you're right. Who knows how they're going to call it? I would bet, not my money, but some of your money, I would bet that they're going to continue to call it like they did last year.
I'll lend you a couple dollars. I don't mind. I'll lend you a couple dollars so we can win that bet. And I hope you're right too, because if the Kings can play defensively for basically an entire season the way they played at the end of last season, I think they have a really good chance of being a pretty dangerous team in the addition to the offense. That's what was interesting too, Whitey, is going back to last trade deadline. I remember it very well because I was in Las Vegas at the time covering the Super Bowl. And the night before the Kings, I think, lost to the Detroit Pistons, the night before the trade deadline. And then they go through the deadline and they literally do nothing. And I remember being frustrated, and it was very different from the trade deadline before when all they did was trade for Kessler Edwards. At that time, I was like, I'm good with this because this team's gotten you this far. Hey, ride it out. The difference a year makes, they didn't make any moves again. And I was like, Monty, what are you doing? Monty takes the podium after that, and he starts talking about the offense needs to get better. The offense needs to get back to where they're at. And I thought that's such a stark contrast from your head coach who's been saying defense. I'm okay sacrificing some of the offense if our defense gets better. And then you have this offseason where the biggest addition that the Kings made bolsters the offense. So a conversation I've been having with a number of guests and even listeners here on Locked On Kings is, if the Kings were to refocus on getting the offense back to where it was 2 seasons ago versus all this focus on improving the defense, do you think that's the best chance that they have of going as far as they can go, is again leaning into their offensive potential?
It seems like that's definitely what they're doing. And to your point, I mentioned that New Orleans game that was here. I remember it was after that game. I'm sure you were in there. Mike Brown saying, you know what? We can't just outscore the other team. And he said something effective. We have people here who think we need to do that. And I'm telling you, you're in for a rude awakening. And to me, it was pretty clear that, all right, we've got a little bit of a disconnect there. My assumption was, Mike and the front office or maybe ownership. So it sounds like, he made progress in that area with the loosening up of the officiating, but that's a battle he's not going to win. The organization's like, no, offense first. I think in order to capitalize on that, they just have to shoot the ball better.
Yeah.
You look, I think they were 3rd in the league in 3-point attempts, and the 2 teams in the finals were 1 and 2, Boston and Dallas, but they were way down the list in percentage. So you have this offense that they just didn't execute very well. That's where DeRozan, of course, is going to come in handy. When you're shooting threes and 35, 40 threes, and they're not going in, DeRozan gives you a little bit of a wrinkle. Well, more than a wrinkle. That's probably disrespectful to him, but a different look. I think that's where the offense is really going to benefit, and he's going to create more threes with his ability to drive almost the way he's not LeBron, but LeBron is a master of penetrating and kicking it out. He's a master of that. He doesn't get enough credit for that. I think DeRozan's going to bring that aspect to the offense. So yeah, they're really banking on improved offense this year, but they got to make shots.
Yeah. And a lot of that comes from, it doesn't all fall on one guy, but I was expecting, Whitey, that Kevin Huerter was going to be gone this offseason. I really believed he was gone. I thought there was a clear disconnect between who Kevin Huerter is as a player and how the Sacramento Kings wanted to play under Mike Brown. It's not that they didn't like each other. Tons of respect between the two of them. And I know for a fact, Mike Brown and the Kings coaching staff respect the fact that what they asked of Kevin did his absolute best to do. It's just defensively, there's clear limitations with the type of player that he is. But we've seen he can be an absolute flamethrower from the perimeter. He started not last season, the season before, shooting 50% from 3-point range for a month, for God's sakes. So a lot of the 3-point shooting falls on Kevin. And I think it's going to be a big debate come training camp time. And I'd love to have you back on at that time and we can debate it too. Because I'm of the belief that you should just start Malik Monk. He's one of your best players. I know Mike Brown loves Malik Monk coming off the bench. Kevin Huerter's still here. The belief is that's his starting spot. I don't know where you fall on that, but what do you think about the significance of Kevin Huerter almost having a simplified role again? And it's just, hey, your job is to go out there and space the floor and hit shots.
Before I answer that, I have to confess, I just realized that behind you, that's the Lord of the Rings, right?
Absolutely.
It's there's Dumbledore and there's Beetlejuice and all of them, all my favorites.
Don't be doing that.
Ewoks, it's great. I love it.
I'm going to kick you off right now. Don't be disrespectful. You and Jason Ross, man, don't be doing that to me.
I think Kevin Huerter's poised for a bounce back year. And I think a lot of what we're seeing with him starting last year and the fact that he's still there, to me, it's about managing him as an asset. He's a person. I get that. But just from a basketball standpoint, his value probably is about as low as it's ever going to get, right? He had a bad year last year and he was hurt. So as far as trade value, you're better off keeping him and at least letting him build that value back up than, just trying to get rid of him. So to that point, I thought one of the reasons they started him last year as much as they did was because A, you don't want to bench a guy if you're trying to trade him, and B, the best chance of getting him back on track was probably to start him. I think he probably starts this year. I know I've referenced Jerry Reynolds already. Jerry said right now, he said, if he's the coach, he said, oh, Keon is the starter at the 2 guard.
Mm.
Malik, I think, is coming off the bench just because he can.
Mm-hmm.
Matt, if you got, can Keon come off the bench? Keon can. Keon's like Kevon Looney. What? I'll start. I don't care. Whatever. Yeah. I'm still going to play. Malik can come off the bench. Can Herter come off the bench? He should be able to, but we don't know. So I think you give him his best chance at getting back to what he was by starting him. That's my best guess.
Well, you talked about my background. I'm going to talk about yours a little bit. I think a lot of people are going to see the bobbleheads, the Kings bobbleheads, all the baseballs, the signed basketball. First thing that jumps off is right over your shoulder. I see Settlers of Catan back there, and that's how I know that you're a real one, because Settlers of Catan, in my family, Settlers of Catan gets hostile.
Really?
Settlers of Catan makes or breaks relationships in my family. If you decide to trade with me, if you come at me with a robber, I'll never speak to you again. And any Settlers of Catan players know how important that game is to a family dynamic.
You know who loves that game? I assume he still does. Is Andrew Luck, big time.
Really?
Yeah, big time Catan.
I did not know that. Okay.
Yes.
We'll play some Catan soon, Whitey. Before we wrap up, last thing. I'm an impatient person, unbelievably impatient. From the second that we found out DeMar DeRozan is a Sacramento King, I'm staring at the calendar just like weeping, because we're still so far away, even from training camp. This is the deadest part of the Kings season. We're hoping for football to hold us over a little bit, and football's slowly starting to come back. But here on Locked On Kings, right, the impatience is real, but the excitement is nuts. What are you and Draper hearing? How have you, like, from the callers that into your show, just between the two of you, like, the buzz for this Kings season? Everybody, the Kings fans are always excited for Kings basketball to return, no matter how good or bad the team is. The buzz for this season seems like it's on another level. I can't wait for even the schedule to come out, just so we know who the Kings are playing to open up the season and when that game's going to be. Because seeing DeMar DeRozan in person for the Sacramento Kings for the first time, I think is going to be a big thing for Kings fans. What's been the excitement level on your guys' show?
It's been very high. Some of the viewership numbers during that period were like, wow. Yeah. People were just delighted. And I think it has to do with something you mentioned. Some people disagree with me, but I still think as Kings fans, we just don't expect that to happen here.
100%.
Malik staying was like, thank you, right? 100%. And then on top of that, DeMar DeRozan, whoa. Yeah. So people are feeling like, thank you, Monty. This is what we wanted you to do, something big to improve the team. Thank you. And all these guys want to play here. Yeah. So in some ways, the enthusiasm, it's not at an all-time high, but it's definitely trending upwards. And the fact that it's coming after last year and all the disappointment and the feeling of, I think there's just a tremendous amount of excitement again.
Whitey, I thought Malik was gone. I'll be straight honest with you. I thought Malik was gone. I was ready to throw a parade through the streets of downtown Sacramento when Malik decided to return. That's a huge deal for this organization. And then the DeMar DeRozan thing was icing on the cake for sure.
Yeah, it reminded me a little bit of when C-Web stayed. But, and people don't like me to talk about this, we don't know how much he really wanted to stay. And it might have been just a matter of, well, okay, this is the best fit for me. He definitely was looking around at things. But Malik wanted to stay here. Yeah. And some of that was probably because he couldn't get a lot of years elsewhere. But you know Malik. You're around Malik all the time. He wanted to be here. There's no question about that. And that just makes Kings fans feel like, all right, see, people are recognizing how special this community and this team can be.
Well, I'm excited to get it all started again. Whitey, I appreciate you coming here on Locked On Kings. First time and hopefully many, many times. I'm looking forward to it. You, of course, you and Draper host a phenomenal show on Sac Town Sports. Love for you. You guys are going all year long, right? It doesn't stop just when sports slow down. So we're all in the content grind together at this point in time, but football's almost here. Football's almost here to hold us through. I appreciate you, my friend. Can't wait to have you join me on the next episode. So we'll do it again very soon.
We'll do it again. And football season's coming up, and so is the Catan Challenge.
Oh, we're in. I'm in. Let's do it. Let's make it happen.